Вітаю, друзі! Радий всіх вас бачити сьогодні. У нас з вами буде цікава
Hello and welcome everybody. We're going to get started with this panel discussion, the adaptation of Ukrainian legislation and public administration in the culture sector to the EU standards.
фінансової підтримки Європейського Союзу реалізується.
This event is funded through the EU
Сьогодні з нами
and the network of national interests. We're happy to welcome the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy, Taras Shevchenko, the Chair of Supreme Council Committee on Culture and Information Policy, Mr. Poturaev, the Executive Director of the Ukrainian Culture Fund, Mr. Yankovsky, and Natalia Forsuk, representing the organization Rebuilding Ukraine Together. For the sake of the gender balance, we're happy to welcome online the representatives Lina Berzinya, the European expert. She will be presenting the research findings. Liza Moroz, she's with the Ukrainian Center of Cultural Studies. And from the donor side, from the EU delegation, we're happy to welcome Tetyana Shulga.
хочу розпочати з трішки, щоб вам розказали про проєкт і передумови цього дослідження. Тому пані
So let's brief you on what is this all about, what anteceded this research.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги. Я буду
Hello, dear colleagues.
відразу перейшли до дослідження пані Лінди.
I'll brief you on this because I'm waiting to have it from Linda. This project is done with the financial support of the EU.
Сфокусувалися на трьох секторах.
We're focused on three sectors, but culture is the key sector among them.
Працює експертна платформа.
There's an expert platform working.
Посилання до неї можна приєднати.
The guys joining us online will find a way to join it.
Але той звіт, який
So we used that platform to discuss the report we made earlier, and we presented it earlier. It's about funding culture from local budgets.
працюємо над рекомендаціями в рамках цієї
And now we're developing recommendations with the help of this expert platform to see how culture be funded at the local level.
секторі в Україні.
We also address
Те, що всі знають,
cultural priorities in the Ukraine facility.
обговорювати звіт нашої європейської
So today we're going to address a report from Linda Berzinya, the European expert. Just a few words about that.
власне по цьому напрямку.
How did this cooperation begin? Back in spring, the EU made an assessment of the Euro integration process in this country across the board. In the sector of education, culture, youth and sports, we've been given a score of 2. And because of that, the Ministry of Culture reached out to us, asking for expert support from a European expert capable of telling us what's missing in the cultural sector, what's wrong there, and then we could think of making a roadmap in order to get a better score in this regard. So we have done some work, and we're going to have more about this from Linda shortly.
Дякую, пані Наталя.
Thank you, Natalia.
Ми можемо перейти до самої презентації.
So with this, let's have it from Linda.
Jump in with presentation.
Hello. Yes, I will, as you say, jump in with presentation. So let's open the presentation, and you say if you see it, because I don't see your screen, so you see mine. Yes.
Так, ми, yes, we see it, Linda.
Okay. So that's good. Is it big enough? I can continue. Yes. Thank you very much for giving me a floor. This summer, I was very glad working together with the Ministry of Culture and with the organization which Natalie represented, and it was really very exciting period. So I will try to do it shortly. I will share the results. What have we done? Basically, also together with the whole team. So my main aim was to make a roadmap for European integration reforms needed in culture sector in Ukraine. So I did a description of Ukraine to the integration process, and I did recommendation part. But the very roadmap, I shall say here, is not a strategy itself, because strategies and working plans, these are things that Ministry of Culture does. My aim was more to give this roadmap, this narrative, where to go, directions, what to reach, and goals and aims, the main things that shall be done, or that is already done, to reach the effective European integration. Because first I have to say that Ministry of Culture and the Ukrainian government has done already quite a lot to reach this, EU values and to even implement many laws already required. So the task was quite easy for me here in a way that many things were already done. And I was very, very happy to see how competent the people in ministry are. So it was my very great pleasure working with them. So first, what I wanted to share is just to give this very big, perhaps very big framework. What are we talking about? It will be very short. Just in European Union, we have the two treaties. One is the biggest treaty that sets up the creation of EU, and it is said there that the very aim of European Union is to bring cultures together. So why I'm saying this, that the very aim of EU is to come together and to respect cultures of each other. So next one is the Treaty of Functioning of EU that says more specific what EU want to achieve. And there are also more specific criteria for culture, but the main is being that culture shall cooperate, the member states shall cooperate in culture sector closely. And the member states shall have common European values, common heritage. We have to find common heritage in each country and to bring it up. So, of course, the association agreement between Ukraine and member states is the main regulatory framework that at this moment that regulates relationship between Ukraine and EU. And it already has quite a lot of points mentioned what you have to achieve with regard of the European integration. And it explicitly says the culture shall collaborate, be in international organizations, what needs to be done in copyright sector, what needs to be done in audiovisual sector. So this shall always be the main document when we look at EU integration. I'm mentioning here also the EU program Creative Europe that you are already aware of, and it is a financial program, but still it is a decision of Council and it sets the main definition. It gives the main tone that culture is now in EU. It gives the main directions of topics, and actually it can also serve not only as a financial fund, it can also serve as a document where to see what is now happening in EU, what problems they are, and what do we want to achieve by financing them. So it can give you a guideline, a topical guideline, what is now a highlight in culture. And I will come later back to this because this whole recommendation basically is very related to the topics that are now at the moment. And the next very important regulatory framework is Audiovisual Media Service Directive, and which I know that you have worked much with, and actually you already have implemented the legal part of it. And it is very important. It is always developing. This is what I wanted to mention by this directive, that it's not standing as it is. Yes, it's now. Of course, it is as you see it, but it's developing all the time because member states in all levels are reacting to all challenges that we have now, digital challenges, artificial intelligence, and the war ongoing by Russia. So it all affects the decisions. So you have always to check what is new in this debate about next act that would follow the Media Service Directive. And the EU copyright law is in a way the most legal part of the culture in the EU because it consists of 2 EU regulations and 13 directives that shall be implemented. But what I wanted to say also here that one thing is this very legal provisions, and it's in a way it's more easy to implement them because they are very clear. You have to do this, this, and that. There are numbers, there are very specific goals, and just few things you have to analyze by yourself. But culture sector is another. In culture sector, there is another part of provisions which is more recommendative provisions. It's recommendations, decisions, opinions, and kind of non-binding but recommendative acts. And it is very relevant also to follow them. But at the same time, it takes much more time, I would say, and creativity and analysis to look for these recommendations, because the recommendations set mainly the goal, but didn't give any mechanism how to manage it. So the member states shall sit together or sit alone in their national level and think how to reach these goals. And it also gives opportunity to look at your own specific situation. So here I'm just mentioning main of these acts. Like there is European Commission, which represents common interests of the EU. And here I wanted to mention that European Commission elaborated agenda for culture. It's in 2018, but it's still, of course, in force. And it sets the very broad meaning of culture. Maybe before culture was really culture, cultural events, singing, dancing, theater. But over years, member states have decided that culture has a bigger impact than before. So culture can benefit and also give to social dimension, which just means what culture can do for well-being, what culture can do for social cohesion, social inclusion. Also, culture is a part of economic dimension. And here, of course, creative industries is one part, but also growth and jobs for cultural sector. And external dimension, what are the relations between member states, between global area? So next big, I would say, framework for European Commission is for cultural heritage issues, which is also a very, very relevant part of EU culture. And now you can feel it in Ukrainian, I think, very deeply, because you see how you are experiencing the great loss at the moment of the heritage, and it is also part of European heritage. So this new heritage framework says that heritage is also a part of society in a way that everyone shall have a chance to access heritage. And I don't talk only about accessing it physically, going into, churches or old castles, but it's also digital accession for people who don't hear, who don't see, for youth. It's also the matter of information, how we provide information about heritage. Another big issue of EU cultural heritage is sustainability. What are the smart solutions for protection of heritage? Resilience, which means how we safeguard our common EU heritage. And here again, we have to emphasize that it's our even task, but it's of our benefit to find which objects of heritage in our countries are of EU level, of European or international level, and then we can safeguard it together. Innovation, it's very important how to mobilize knowledge of protection, new knowledge of protection, new ways of restoration, and global partnerships, again, as in all areas. Here, I also want to mention that in culture area, as we see it very broad sense, we have to keep in mind the very general aims of the EU. And now, in a top priorities for the EU are set by European Commission, but by Madame von der Leyen, which is the president of Commission, and she said that and wrote, and everyone follows that the main 5 topics is European Green Deal, for Europe to become the first climate neutral country. Also, Europe fit for digital age. It means empowering people with technology. for economy that works for people. It means to think more about social fairness, for inclusion, for stronger Europe, which means that how Europe's voice can be more heard in the global arena. And of course, promoting European way. Here, it's very important. It is meant how to protect democracy, how to protect our democracy and talk about democracy. First, it may seem doesn't relate to culture, but no, it does relate to culture. It shall relate to culture because culture can give these topics a lot, and also culture can gain from these topics. And therefore, the main point here is that whenever we create culture strategies or culture action plans, or we just think about culture, we have to think in a broader sense of culture. This is basically first thing that I would recommend, not only for Ministry of Culture, but it's for the whole government to see that culture is very important part of bigger plans. It's not just theater, dancing, or orchestra. So, moving on, I would also like to mention, it's very shortly because it's also the part of the member states that are working in Council of European Union, and they are having the culture plan for 2 or 3 years. It differs a little bit from the previous work plan that I mentioned by European Commission, because European Commission is setting broader perspective, but Council, where member states come together, they are setting short-term and middle-term goals. So, and you see that they are very similar. It's how to empower cultural professionals to do more, how to raise the voice of culture in society, how to promote this green transition, Green Deal, sustainability, and how to strengthen the international cultural relations. And now it's even written down that we have to include Ukraine in this international relations and in connections. But I would also suggest to see all working plans that Council had done also before, because they are more precise and they give already some clear mechanisms that can be followed. And what is very important that it's not only in paper, they are so-called OMCs, open groups of coordination, that experts of member states come together and they share very specific practical issues. How can member states implement, like, this first point of empowering culture professionals? What shall be done? How to, I don't know, let's say how to improve tax system or mobility of professionals so that the artists and culture sector can move more, can create more, can gain more money for themselves, can earn more, which is very important because culture sector usually is not, they are not the best paid professionals. So, moving forward, I would also mention that the European Parliament also creates a lot of resolutions, of course, and documents that relate to culture. And also here I shall say that Parliament is more the voice of citizens. Of course, their recommendations are more far-reach. I mean, they are more long-term. They are more just giving the directions. But of course, they can be very strong because they set the very tone that something just shall not happen or something shall be immediately improved. So other institutions and member states have to react somehow on these papers. And I'm just mentioning a few of them, which is also related to Ukraine. Parliament did a resolution on situation of artists and cultural recovery, about heritage in conflicts and armed conflicts, and there are a lot of more recommendations, resolutions that just set the tone that is important to follow, and they also give some maybe good sentences to use when culture have to fight their role, let's say in other sectors. Before I go to progress of Ukraine, I would also like to say that culture that all these papers that I mentioned, all these papers can be used just to check the definitions, to check the directions, to check the tone, and they can be used whenever Ministry of Culture or other ministries or government is setting some priorities, some strategies, some activity plans. So when we go to progress in Ukraine, so I'm not saying anything new. European Commission already announced that Ukraine has met 2 of 7 conditions that was set for Ukraine. It's quite clear from this paper that audiovisual policy is one of the sectors. But still I have to say that anyway you go further, this accession agreement and the points that are set here for culture, cultural heritage, copyright and audiovisual policy, it shall be the main act because it will always keep as the main point, reference point also for European Commission and other member states. And also, as you know, then at the end of this year, Ukraine will receive more detailed analysis of everything, of every sector. So we will see what happens there, and it will be, of course, the most important document that you would receive. But anyway, if for culture, for sake of culture, it's always I think good to move to European direction because the values and things that are set there, they are made for many member states, many experts. They have came together and slowly created something that they find is very valuable. So it anyway can have as a very good road to move forward. So it's just a little bit to come together of everything that I said, that the strategic in legal acts and there are set strategic goals and very specific provisions. But what shall be done more shall be made focus on the procedures of the instruments, of the events, of campaigns, of those small and detailed things that brings us to reach those big aims. This would be one of my also recommendations to look more to these very specific things and detailed things and move further from legal provisions and move and how to find more events, more campaigns, information campaigns, social campaigns and mechanisms that is not law, but is more action activity. So basically, yeah, this is the one of main things that I wanted in this slide. And another one is that when creating strategies and policy planning documents, then giving specific policy indicators that you have for sure, but developing them more, they just can give you clear results that you want to achieve. They can also give you very clear communication, how to communicate. So we wanted that in cultural sector in this year we would manage at least 15 national level events that engage society and government. So at the end of the year you can say, yes, we managed like 13 of them, two are missing because of this or that, but then we know that we can move on if necessary and we can analyze specific tasks. I'm not saying that there is no policy indicators. Of course they are, but at this moment I saw mostly legal provisions that we have to implement this and that act. But the policy indicators can also be more open to activities, social activities and events. Also, what I wanted to say that whenever we think about EU, it's not only that Israel have to follow EU things. It's also about engagement, about sharing, what Ukraine can give, what are your needs. Because when you are moving to EU path, you always have to think, what do you want out of it? What are your needs? What you can offer to others? But what is something that we don't know, but you know? So whenever thinking about this culture and EU integration, keep in mind what are your needs, because you can always express them, you can share them. And not, if not in legal way, in legal acts, then there are these events and other mechanisms that can be used. Moving to the roadmap, what I would just share in a small point, what will be the main directions where to move. So I have to say that cultural diversity is like a very motto and slogan of European Union. And it talks about freedom of expression and also freedom of cultural choice. And it's very, very important because Ministry of Culture also keeps media and audiovisual files. So here, what is maybe the challenging is always to find this balance between national culture and between different culture and diversities of culture. So in cultural policy, you have to always find this balance that we share, we give floor to other cultures, and we cherish other cultures, but we also strengthen our own culture, which is part of this diversity. So yes, other things that I already mentioned to create more policy outcomes and performance indicators that move toward EU values, just to have a good monitoring system and a good basis for clear communication with society. I also mentioned and explained more about cultural mapping, and what do I mean by that? This is to check what is the current situation in Ukraine, how many organizations we have, how many NGOs, how many institutions, how many people are working there and engaging in cultural area. Why is this important? It's important like for statistics, for cultural strategy. And if you make this as a digital tool, let's say, then anyone can check who wants to make some networking or cooperation. They can check, okay, there is this and that organizations or cultural workers in this city. And so it can also work as a legal statistical tool if it's made like this. And what is interesting, it can also work as a financial tool. You can also use it as when you have to decide on financing in regions and cities. Next, I would move to engagement. I already mentioned a little bit, but yes, to make the platform for culture to discuss the cultural policy between cultural sector, local governments, businesses, NGOs, universities, and other people. It's important to have this platform. And I know that there is already platform, there are platforms, how sector is engaged, but still it can always be improved. And culture also deserves its own platform because cultural sector is huge. It's very big and it shall have their own platform, be it consultation committees to minister or to consultation boards to ministry or to government there are many ways how to reach this, but these platforms are very useful. And it's also not only for the results that the ministry has achieved. It's also for elaboration of policy. Usually we use these platforms just to check if this law or this activity is needed. What is the society opinion about it? And in long term or even in middle term, if it works out, then one part of culture policy is already done because culture then the sector speaks for itself. It helps to communicate about things if they are involved. Then they can gather more and more people. They can make their own groups and bring up and work by themselves. So it comes to this bottom-up approach that when involving more communities, they become a part of policy making and they help you out. Of course, it can be different, but therefore it's important to have those specific policy outcomes just to go and move and talk about them. When talking about bottom-up approaches, I wanted also to stress one thing that usually, and it happens that in local governments, in cities or in regions, culture area is included in the biggest bigger strategies, but slowly you would have to move that cities or regions, they have also cultural strategies. It is not the work of ministry because it's a competence of the very regions or local governments, but ministry can just give guidelines and tell why it's so important that this region or city has its own cultural strategy and cultural activity plan, let's say for 7 years. And last point here, which is very important, that this broad concept of culture. We don't see culture as only dance, theater, or architecture. We see this broader concept, and so we have to cross culture with other sectors, economy, like the creative industries, or protection of cultural heritage, or improving job conditions, or education, when we think about identity, about history, about new developments that happen in culture, new expressions. Regional policy, when we talk about all the regional areas, social sector, when we talk about how disabled people can be involved in culture, how they can access culture, when you don't see, do you have subtitles or accessibility and other issues. So it's important to have this cross-sectoral segment in cultural policy, but also it shall have the cultural references shall be in regional strategy, in foreign strategy, in economy strategy. It's important that they are included everywhere. Also, I would like to mention networking. This is one of the recommendations that is very relevant because it basically is the basis of all European Union to collaborate, to cooperate. So networking is a big part of it. And it's important to see what are the obstacles of good networking. Is it a language problem? People, maybe culture sector area need more help in learning languages. Or is it a money problem? Maybe there are some bigger associations or networks that need membership fees that can be helped. And also it relates to information that we can see about Ukraine, how well we can see translations of Ukrainian institutions and organizations, and how well people from other countries can reach information about Ukrainian culture sector. Next thing, and I actually would say that it is the very most important at this point, is raising the level of interest in culture. Is basically communication. I would say communication shall be the thing that goes everywhere. Whatever you do, you see, can we communicate this or not, and how to communicate this? Because nowadays, if there is no communication, there is nothing. So basically, you always have to think how to communicate things. And whenever, for example, whenever state money is included or some subsidies, then there shall be strong rules of how to communicate them. Specific logos and size, like how to communicate where to put this information. So the sector also does it for you if it receives money. And of course, digitalization, which is a big thing nowadays, and it's very, very challenging. Therefore, it shall be done together with other ministries and institutions involved. And here is this big challenge of data protection and copyright that comes into the digitalization issue. Just shortly give more specific recommendations in creative industries. Here I just wanted to mention a few things. That first, creative industries deserve the same chances as other business industries. They deserve to be in the same business forums or abroad or inside your country. It is a part of industry. Creative industry is a part of industry, and it's the development of it can be very slow because at first it's very hard to understand how it differs from other. How can you say that this cultural product is just cultural product and this is cultural industry? So it's a big work of definitions, of raising awareness, of including those creative industries to really make it sure that yes, this is culture, but this is culture industry. And also in the EU level, it was not easy. It was years when the definition of culture and creative industries have changed over years. It was very hard, very challenging. But now I think it's very clear. So therefore, second point would be that yes, we need to make this general awareness. And third point, which is is to strengthen about education. How much cultural academy, let's say, or all the educational institutions that learn culture, how well they can, how well they learn about business, and opposite, how well business sector do know about creative industries. And here, in creative industry, science and innovation is very important part, because all creative industries basically raise up from something new, something innovative. Perhaps I won't go more deeply in this cultural heritage issue. I already mentioned more very specific points in this area, and also in audiovisual policy. That there is this directive, but most important now would be to implement the recommendations and handbooks and other things that are mentioned in directive that you implement in the media law, and to follow the audiovisual policy. There is always something new coming up. The same for copyright policy, that promoting this awareness of copyright, just to don't have piracy, and to strengthen the sector is very important. In my report, I also gave a few ideas how to gain funding in different EU funds other than cultural funds. So you can see social fund or solidarity fund. So there are more funds that culture can use for its benefits, to develop growth, to develop jobs, and social situation. And also, like, for example, in digital and single market and health programs. So these are all programs that culture can use, and you can read more in a report. And maybe just to finalize, I can say here you can see all kind of good things that could come out of effective EU culture integration in Ukraine, that culture has more significant role and voice over other sectors, that there is more detailed culture policy that comes from bottom up decision making. Culture sector is more connected to other sectors and other areas, like I mentioned, economy, regions, education. Culture becomes more accessible to everyone, for young people, for old people, for disabled people, and so on. But culture is more engaged in global events and international scene, through networking, through events. And culture can give more to green and sustainable development of your country. So these would be main benefits that from EU integration in culture. I think that I was telling already much, and I will stop here. I could talk about it very much and very long, but main ideas I think I said. So thank you very much for having me here.
Дякую, Лінда, за презентацію. Вона була дійсно дуже детальна і чудово розписана.
Thank you for this detailed presentation. Appreciate that. So let's now discuss this. Let's have some comments. Let's have it from Taras Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy on European Integration. Hello, and thank you for this report. Well, it's been quite a lot of work behind it, I guess. As a Deputy Minister, I've had a question, and I discussed it with Natalia earlier on. So we've been given a low score. For the most part, it was about education, sports, youth, and culture. So we got 2 out of 5. So what should Ukraine do in order to get the maximum score and to be in line with the European integration and culture at the same time? If we think of audiovisual policy, well, at least you've got some directives and you can see what you should do. You spoke of 7 conditions we have to meet, and that's as clear as you can get. But 7 conditions, that's just a starting point. It's not everything the country should do in terms of European integration. It's not even the biggest part of the deal. Once the negotiations begin, maybe later on this year, the number of commitments for the country will go up significantly, I believe. The scores that we receive as a country are important because it allows us to see how we can proceed towards the EU and how we can demonstrate our capacities, letting people know that the government are on it. They go within the strategic priorities. And it also allows us to show the European countries that this country is making quick progress, meeting its commitments, some of which are not in question right now. So if we do 7 items on audiovisual policy, we understand it's not the end of story. We gotta do something else, and we're ready to do everything that we should in the cultural sector. Right now, there seems to be no clear-cut directive. So right now we have a list of conditions. I don't know if it's good or not, but at least we can go by the conditions to see what we're gonna do. And maybe at some point in future, we will be able to get more instructions in order to make with a better culture policy. Everything we do in the culture policy, in the media policy, has to engage the stakeholders as much as possible, and that's the cross-cutting principle that you can see in all of our policies, and we always abide by that. There are also important items on diversity and collaboration, international events, cultural networks, mapping. The Ukrainian Cultural Fund is doing some of that. So we're trying to jointly determine priorities for the next year, and I think the report will indicate that. And the Ukrainian Culture Fund will be recognized for doing some of this work. Yaroslav, the person in charge of the fund, is here with us, and he might add something to that later. So we're going to try and make with the plans, further plans, and I think the report will also indicate further steps we have to take to achieve more. But I'd like to say that I appreciate this project funded by the EU. I appreciate the research findings. So we all are working together trying to make this country a part of the EU. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Taras. Let's have it from Tetyana, who is joining us online from the EU delegation office in Ukraine. Okay, I think I should be able to see you guys instead of just the final slide, because that's all I can see right now. Could you show me the room where you are?
Алло, добрий день, мене чутно?
Чутно, все добре, ми вас бачимо і чуємо добре.
Я вас не бачу. Якщо можна вивести на екран.
I was saying that I'd like to see you guys, because I can see the last slide. Thank you for your attention, but I cannot see you. Is there any way to let me see you in that room?
Я між тим почну коментувати навіть в такому сліпому режимі. Справді, цей звіт підкреслює декілька важливих речей.
Well, effectively, there is a number of important things in this report. So Linda spoke of the importance of making the first step in the process of cultural integration with the EU. So there is a need to have a shared context and a common language as we speak about culture and culture policy. And this language, this verbiage, should not just be used by professionals in the government that know the score, but it should be something understandable to the rest of the stakeholders. It should be something understandable by culture sector people, civil society, culture activists, and so on. So apart from the acquis, which is not a big deal, we need to look at the resolutions of the European Council. They're not binding in nature, yet they matter because they allow us to understand the priorities of the EU and the policies that are priority policies for the EU. And if we join the EU, these policies are going to be shared. So we have to take a sensible participation in the making, in the drafting of those policies. Sorry guys, I still cannot see you, I still see the slide. Is there any way to remove the slide from my screen? Okay, we're working on it, but there have been some technical glitches. Then we gotta speak about the stakeholders and the need for a small yet professional team who will go through all of these legislative acts to see which ones are most important. They should be able to see if they are the priority ones, priority acts, and will be a significant part of the European integration and preparation for membership and dialogue. And they will also see which of these acts have to be addressed in a broader context, but they should not necessarily be integrated into the Ukrainian law. I'm happy to see Luisa Moroz. She studied in the College of Europe, and I hope she will contribute to this cause in the culture sector, preparing it for European integration. And we're going to have experts, even young experts, who will be able to understand all of the ins and outs and what's going on in the EU culture sector. This is quite helpful. It allows us to negotiate professionally, considering the developments in Ukraine. We're still getting started with all this, so maybe later on this year we're going to be able to make certain practical steps, and then we will work out the details. In the culture sector, it's not easy, as Taras has just said. Most of the things mentioned in this presentation are cross-cutting issues, so they are the business of other ministries and agencies as well, not just Ministry of Culture. So we gotta make sure that government institutions in this country work together in synergy, that they communicate with each other. That's so important. There is the role of civil society in all this. The expertise can rely on their expertise. And I guess this project is a good showcase. And this kind of cooperation may well happen very effectively. The Ministry of Culture is not the most powerful ministry right now, and the culture is not a top priority, but still this ministry could use the capacities of civil society using donor funding. So I think this cooperation model will keep working under the current restrictions that you see in the culture sector right now. There is something else I want to talk about. It's about the European integration and recovery plans for Ukraine. Again, culture sector has been put on the back burner in those plans. It's not a top priority. So if we think of recovery, in particular, culture priorities, you will see the development of culture industry, not actually creative industry, but IT. Human capital is also mentioned. There are many human needs that are indicated there, like the need for education, the need for a place to live in, for a job, but culture is not so often mentioned among those. So the community and the ministry need to keep making sure that the culture becomes a part of the deal. And without culture, everything else will not make much sense. So that's basically what I could tell you about this. I think it's been a good start, and at least it allows us to keep this discussion going. We can engage more stakeholders in this, because this subject is quite an interesting thing to discuss. But hopefully, based on this document, we will be able to keep moving on, taking further steps and completing further stages of integration into the culture policy. Thank you, my invisible friends. I haven't been able to see you guys ever, as long as I've been talking. I think you need to re-enter and you will get the view of the conference room. Well, maybe. Okay, so let's see if there are any questions right now. I have the first question for Linda. So you have been able to see Ukraine from outside, and still I've got a question like this. Which sectors of culture and media still have the unlocked potential? And what should we do in order to help them unlock this potential so that everybody else could see what they're capable of? So where can you see a lot of this unlocked potential at the moment?
Yaroslav, that was a question for me or someone else? I'm sorry.
Linda,
yeah, that was for you.
For you, how do you see from side what are the weakest sectors in culture, right?
Sectors with unleashed potential and how to increase it, how to make it being usable in Ukraine.
Ukraine culture is really very deep and very deep roots, and I think this is one thing that can be more strengthened is to find all the spots in Ukraine culture in all areas of culture that you have to bring out and say this is something that brings us to European family. This is something that Germany, Latvia, Spain shall know about, because it gives some big impulse to something that happened in the world. Let's say now during the war we see so many cultural expressions from Ukraine that we didn't know that it's Ukraine culture, but now we know because people talk about it very much. So it would be like one thing to gather together everything of Ukrainian culture that we all shall know about in a structured form. And I know that you work for it already very hard. I'm just like mentioning that this is a very relevant task, because when you look then at EU funds, then you always see priorities, or you see that there needs to be reference to European level heritage or European level culture. So this would be one thing. Another thing is this cultural and creative industries that has a very great potential in Ukraine, as Ukraine is a big country, many people, many traditions, and very big potential for innovation. So to put together the science sector and culture sector, to have some programs, some creative, laboratories or other activities that put them together. It's not easy because science sector is always very quiet. They want to be by their own. They want to sit in their rooms and not to share. But it's important that they share, and the culture can cooperate and find the best solutions. I can give you a few examples that I know the culture creative industry is really raised up. It's in digital culture, when culture sector has some idea how to do something digitally, but they don't know how to do it digitally, how to gain this aim. And then people from IT sector or science IT sector can help to have this aim. Or there is another example of how you can make some pottery. Let's say I'm coming from Latvia, and one of the first creative industries examples was how pottery was made together with scientists, and they made a very specific material that is very strong, and it shines in very different way than you can have normally in pottery. So it was one of the biggest examples then for creative sector that this is creative industry. They created together with scientists, and they can sell it for a very high price, and because it's very special. It gives this very much value added. So, I think, I don't know if I answered, I could talk much about it, but just to mention these two areas, and of course this audiovisual area, which is wide potential, let's say in cinema, you have so many plots and where international movies can be shot. You have so many people with a good knowledge. So involve and develop the cinema sector, cinema knowledge, and be shown in all the world that what you can offer, how you can benefit, and how your people can get money, salaries out of it. This would be 3 points. Yaroslav, thank you.
Окей, thank you, Linda. Дякую, Лінда. Тепер вже переходимо до питання в залі.
All right. Thank you, Linda. Let's have more questions.
Дякувати за досить оперативне виконання домашнього завдання з 7 пунктів, там з яких
Well, you told us that you have been able to meet the 7 conditions. You have been able to do it quickly enough, and I appreciate that. In the humanitarian sector, you can have a success rate of 94% if what you say is true. But if you have 94% of success rate, you cannot get 2 out of 5 as a total score. So something doesn't jibe in that with me. There is a Ukrainian facility which takes care of reforms. So tell us, what does the parliament think about the role of Ukrainian culture? It's not an easy question. In the war setting, when you think of survival as a state, as a nation, certainly culture does not seem to be the biggest priority. So you primarily think of preserving what you have got right now. So if we think that we need to preserve what we have got, some people go ahead and say that we don't need to fund culture, we need to fund something more important than that. I know that culture is an indispensable part of the national self-identification. Actually, culture is this national self-identification. So this ongoing war is the war over the self-identification. I guess it's not the war over territories, although it might be a part of the deal too. Well, culture has to be funded, but right now, as the war continues, not too many people get this point. Some people just fail to appreciate the importance of culture. There should be a government policy on culture. I know the Ministry of Culture is doing everything they can. And this work began before 2020, even before 2019, as the new president took over. It began way earlier than that. And there has been lack of consistency, I think. In 2019, there was a concept of setting up a big humanitarian ministry. Then they abandoned this idea, and a number of agencies were doing their part of the work in this sector. So there was no like single ministry taking care of this. And they would do it in different ways, and sometimes it was not clear who was supposed to be doing what. The Ministry of Youth and Sports may think of making some movies about sports, about athleticism, male athleticism. So it's about youth and sports. And you gotta keep those two together somehow. So youth has to be developed. It should not just be athletic and blunt or dull. Youth has to be developed in all sorts of ways. These people should be well read. They should be savvy about technologies. They also should go out for sports. So I think it should be this sort of combination. So there hasn't been a consistent humanitarian policy lately. My committee is working on this. The reform has not been completed, and the committee is still around. Maybe in the next parliament, this committee will be gone. You may choose to live without culture, and you might have some success, you might have some achievements, but it's not going to be the best way to go. It's just a matter of choice. It's about trying to understand what you're doing and why you're doing that, what for. So I'd like to see more certainty in this matter. Maybe there will be more certainty with this over time in this country. And then it's going to be clearer to us what we're going to do in terms of recovery. What is it that we need to help recover? So maybe the priority will be to rebuild big factories, or maybe we're going to try to look for technologies in order to rebuild something else, in order to regain the heritage this country has had for hundreds of years, if not thousands. because we've had some pieces of unique heritage here and there which have never been researched into. We can choose to forget about that and think of supplying water to some parts of the country, and we're going to do it in the old way. So some of those unique areas will be filled with water, and that's it. So we need to definitely understand what is it that we have to rebuild and why. Are we going to rebuild it the way that we do it in the 19th century, or are we going to do it the way we should do it in the 21st century? I'd like to say that I appreciate the project Restoring the Country Together and the EU that funded the research. We all have to be on the same page. We need to understand what are the priorities of the European neighbors, what are their key areas of priority, and then we will get a better idea. We will see that Europe is going that way and we have to do the same. I cannot tell the ministry what they should be doing, and I cannot tell the Ukrainian Culture Foundation what they should be doing. But I guess the foundation should look into the European priorities and see what they are. Then European partners will be able to see that Ukrainian agencies and institutions are moving along the same lines, and then they might offer a grant to support our project. And that's how it should work. Maybe it's a very simplistic example, but I think it gives you an idea. So this research has been very much needed right now. And just one more point and I'm done. European integration in the culture sector has only begun, I would say. Many laws are yet to be implemented. And some of them are pertinent to culture, because we speak about the digital dimension. There are two major documents, Digital Marketing Act and Digital Services Act. These are the new ones. DCA has come through earlier this year. The implementation will start in the EU next year and it should be completed in 2027. Even the European partners tell us not to rush with this, not to rush into doing that because they don't know how to implement it in Europe right now. But we have to prepare anyway. So we gotta be preparing. We gotta be on it. Not everything is described in the European roadmaps. We were drafting a new law on museums and museum sector. We try to use the best practices of Europe in this sector, but not everywhere and not every time. Sometimes we don't have some standards for museums, how you operate a museum, how you take care of that, so we gotta make sure we've got some laws on that. Yaroslav and Taras know what I'm talking about. We were also drafting laws on cultural heritage. Well, maybe someday the architectural heritage at least will be duly protected. Well, you gotta think of priorities anyway. We cannot be totally focused on museums. But if we let it slide, then instead of the museums, you might see some high-rises constructed in those sites. So we should not forget about that. So European integration gives you a roadmap, a way to go, certain things that you gotta do. We have met with the Euro Commissioner on extension, and there has been a discussion about national languages of the communities and minorities in the world. It was a good discussion, but in the end he said, well, we can keep this discussion going, but then we're going to see each other again in a year. But the negotiations are supposed to start on the 1st of January. So sometimes it's hard to think of these markers and roadmaps, but it kind of helps if you have it, in particular in the culture sector. You have mentioned the Ukraine Culture Fund. In 2022, all of the money from the fund was given to the army. So I have a question for Vladislav Barkovsky. You did some opinion sampling in the culture sector to see what's happening there. So what can you tell us about the capacities of culture sectors? Some people left Ukraine. So will there be any incentives for culture sector people to consider going back to Ukraine? Ever since the war began, the Ukraine Culture Fund has been doing research, sifting through statistics and surveys, and every quarter we make those reports in order to offer the latest updates. We took our time analyzing the capacities of the sector, and we can see that most of the culture organizations have furnished an interesting answer. We asked them, have you been able to adapt to the war setting? And the second question was, do you have a particular plan of action in this crisis setting? And here's what they say. More than 80% of the organizations say that they have been able to adapt to the war conditions. But when you speak about something specific like, are you ready to do something? Do you have a strategic idea of what you should be doing? Then only 25% of them say they've got certain plans or ideas of what they're going to do in this crisis setting. So the institutions and agencies, including the civil sector, might say that they have been able to adapt to this new situation, but at the same time they do not have a particular plan. So the Culture Foundation has got a problem because we didn't know who will be fulfilling projects. Can we expect quality projects next year, and how much will be needed for that? So this research is important to us because it allows us to see the way to go. We're working on the priorities, and starting the 1st of November, we're going to start preparing for the new grant programs. So this report will underpin it as a roadmap, so we can see which way we're going and what can we offer to the culture sector. So we gotta enable the most comfortable conditions to make Ukrainians go back to their home countries, and they should find a way to do something inside Ukraine in the culture sector of this country. They should find a way to make some cultural products and other things here. But still, I don't see a strong likelihood that many of these people will choose to come back. I don't see many people capable of doing their projects inside Ukraine right now. So my organization, the committee, the ministry, the fund, and the civil sector, we have to address this matter. I mean, we have to figure out how to bring the creative youth back and creative people back to the country, and how can we make sure they enjoy favorable conditions here to do their job in the culture sector to benefit this country. Okay, thank you. My next question goes to Luisa Moroz. She worked in the Directorate of Creative Industries. She has spent some time in the internship in Europe. I have a question about getting closer to the EU. It's all about competitiveness. It's about the capacity to create innovations. Ukrainian culture is struggling to survive. Creative industry and entrepreneurs say that things are way bad. 65% of respondents say that things are real bad in this sector. So do you think Ukraine will find enough ways to support creative industries, which would not just survive, but would think of evolving and producing innovations? Well, indeed, they spoke about European integration a lot today. There are things that we must do. There are certain regulations we have to abide by. There are non-binding provisions. But I would say that EU integration is about certain mechanisms and managerial practices and institutional aspects. You can think of ways of doing business. You can think of a certain culture. And these practices are not typically enshrined in agreements or directives. Yet they are like unwritten rules that the country should abide by if it wants to become a part of European family. So there are data-based policies in which case decisions are made and analysis of stakeholders is conducted. You actually check with the stakeholders and see how much it's going to cost, and you think of options and scenarios, and that's the way we should do it in our country. These decisions should have enough rationale. They should be based on particular data. The Ukrainian Cultural Research Center is a state-run agency. It is subordinated to the Ministry of Culture. And these guys are collecting updates on creative industries, and these data are helping the country to see how much we have lost because of the war within our DNA. That's a big analytical project. It's a rapid damage assessment, and we can see what's going to be needed for recovery. So the World Bank and partners are doing this assessment. Last year in February, it's been a year since the war began. In the creative industries, the losses made $11 billion. The total losses across the sector is slightly more than 15 billion. We're trying to find a methodology to assess the damage in the non-material cultural heritage. Well, we have to assess the damage done to the architectural monuments and museum collections. Sometimes we have no access to the occupied areas. But it's even harder to assess damage done to non-material heritage like rites, rituals, traditions, some of which are lost because of the war. So it's hard to estimate the loss of talents and professionals that had to leave because of the war. And now these people cannot do what they used to do here. The center also elaborates regional statistics for culture sector. So as you can see, a lot of work has to be done. And in the EU, they are discussing reforms of culture statistics. They think of various classifiers, codes, ways of doing this. They review the terminology and verbiage, so we need to keep monitoring that and be aware of that. European integration is a comprehensive process. Culture is a cross-cutting thing, so it is found in many other sectors. And that's an ongoing process. There is a list of acts we have to implement in this country. There are new acts coming up, and sooner or later we're going to have to implement those as well. There is a proposal to regulate geographic markings, and it is something that is discussed in the EU. It's a way of branding some mural, glass, or things like that. We've got some professionals in Ukraine in this sector, so we have to think it over, and we need to monitor all this. There are certain priorities at the level of the European Commission. There are things that are fundamental for the creative industries. The European Green Course is something we have to keep in mind all the time in this sector. So there is a lot to do, both for the government institutions and local self-government, private sector. And this is a kind of synergy of all those partners and stakeholders. It's not an easy thing, but it's got its benefits, even financial ones. If you implement certain provisions of the directive on audiovisual services, and the law on media and commercials, then if we do it successfully, we're going to be able to access to Creative Europe program in this sector. The directive allows the member states to require financial contributions from big streaming platforms, so they would give some money to the local content, and if Ukraine becomes a member, it will enjoy this possibility. Well, right now things are going hard, and Ukrainian creative entrepreneurs struggle to survive, but they can only survive if they keep evolving. Right now, what you get is the war of innovations and technologies. We have to keep evolving economically, culturally. So all of these techniques and new managerial practices, networking and training, all of this matters right now. And it's not just a business of government institutions. It is something that should be done by creative businesses, NGOs. I think it's a good idea to think of a gender-balanced approach in pay. You can digitalize certain processes. Some decisions have to be based on data. There should be a hassle-free policy, open-door policy in companies and institutions. National budget funding is restricted, but Creative Europe program could offer certain opportunities to us, as well as other European programs, some of which are done in Ukraine through the network of national culture institutions. So we gotta be proactive. We have to be aware of changes, we have to be able to adapt, and apart from regulatory things, we have to think of all of the managerial, institutional, and business practices that would aid us in this cause. Thank you. Now back to the ministry. We know that Ukraine has been able to meet all of the requirements on the media sector, and it may join the media bloc and get funding from the Creative Europe program. So could you tell us about any progress made in the course of those negotiations? And secondly, Mr. Bordel has come to Ukraine recently. He has been to Odessa. He said something about heritage. Is there anything good in what he has said about that? We actually met in this room back then. He also came down to Kiev and he met with the Center of Strategic Communications. There was a big delegation of other colleagues that he brought along. So that meeting was about information safety and how to combat misinformation and how to gain support in that. As for Creative Europe, well, back in summer I've had some meetings in Brussels. We spoke about the algorithm of what European Commission will be doing further. I told them we had met all of the commitments. After the meeting, they sent us an official letter. In response, we sent a letter to them requesting to admit us into all of the Creative Europe programs in the audiovisual sector, including movie sector. So the ball is in the EU park right now. We're hoping to get their reply as soon as possible. I haven't seen this as an official record, but the start of membership negotiations will allow the European institutions to start respective processes of cooperation with the country. We're gonna finish some unfinished business. I mean, the law on national communities and other things. On the 1st of January, the negotiations are supposed to start, so maybe we're gonna see progress with this. Any further questions? Any comments from the panel participants? Alrighty. Well, we have done well time-wise. Thank you all. So with this, we're gonna discontinue the panel. Today there has been a presentation of the report on the potential progress and further plans in the culture sector in terms of European integration. We've had people from the Parliament, Ukrainian institutions, Ministry of Culture. There has been online participation. We were happy to welcome people from the European and Ukrainian research community. Thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Дякую, до побачення. Goodbye, Linda. It was good to see you.